Have you ever discovered that something everyone thought belonged to them actually belonged to you? That's exactly what happened after my grandfather passed away. At first I thought I had simply inherited a large ranch, some farmland, a few barns, and a lot of open land. But when the estate lawyers finished reviewing the documents, we discovered something nobody expected. The property wasn't just big, it was 1,300 acres, and sitting right in the middle of that land was an entire HOA neighborhood. My grandfather bought the land decades ago, back when the area outside town was mostly farmland and open prairie. Over time, parts of the surrounding land were sold to developers, but my grandfather was extremely careful with paperwork. He never sold the central property. Instead, he signed a very specific type of agreement with the developer, a long-term land lease. That meant the houses in the neighborhood were privately owned, but the land underneath them still belonged to my grandfather. And now, it belonged to me. Most residents had no idea. To them, the HOA controlled everything: the roads, the parks, the landscaping, and supposedly the land itself. But when the lease documents were reviewed, we discovered something important. The developer had signed a 50-year ground lease with my grandfather, and that lease included a fixed monthly land rent paid through the HOA. For decades, the HOA had been quietly paying that lease, but over time, something strange happened. The HOA leadership began acting like they owned the land outright, and eventually, they stopped paying the lease entirely. My grandfather was in his late 80s by then and rarely dealt with the paperwork personally. The missed payments went unnoticed for years, but once the estate attorneys started reviewing everything, they spotted the problem immediately. The HOA hadn't paid land rent in almost 4 years, so I scheduled a meeting with the HOA board. I figured we would simply clear up the misunderstanding, maybe restart the lease payments. Simple, professional, civil. Unfortunately, that meeting didn't go the way I expected. The moment I explained the situation, the HOA president leaned back in her chair and laughed. Her name was Linda, but like many people in the area, everyone called her Karen. Karen told me their community had existed for years. She insisted the HOA owned the land now. According to her, the lease documents were probably outdated. I showed them the actual paperwork, original contracts, county records, survey maps, everything clearly showing the land still belonged to my family estate. Karen barely glanced at the documents. Then she said something that surprised everyone in the room. "You're not getting $1 from this neighborhood." At that moment I realized something. They didn't think I would push the issue. Maybe they assumed I didn't understand the legal details. Or maybe they thought a young ranch owner wouldn't challenge an entire HOA. But they were wrong. A week later, my lawyer sent a formal notice. It outlined the unpaid lease, the 4 years of missed payments, and the updated lease rate allowed under the contract, because according to the original agreement, if the lease was violated, the landowner had the right to renegotiate the rate immediately, and that's exactly what we did. The new lease terms were simple. The monthly land rent for the neighborhood would now be 3 times higher, triple the previous amount. The HOA board was furious. Karen sent several emails calling the increase ridiculous and unfair, but the contract was very clear. They had broken the lease, which meant renegotiation was completely legal. Within weeks, reality started setting in because the HOA had 2 choices. Option 1, pay the updated lease. Option 2, challenge the ownership in court, which their lawyers quickly warned them would be extremely expensive and very difficult to win because the land records were crystal clear. Eventually, the HOA requested another meeting. This time the tone was completely different. Karen wasn't laughing anymore. Instead, the board wanted to negotiate. After several long discussions, we reached a compromise. The HOA agreed to resume the lease payments. They also paid a large portion of the unpaid rent from the previous years. In exchange, I slightly reduced the new monthly rate, still higher than before, but manageable for the community. In the end, the situation was resolved peacefully. The residents kept their homes, the HOA continued operating, and the land lease finally returned to what it was always supposed to be, a legal agreement. Karen eventually stepped down as HOA president. Apparently, the residents weren't happy about discovering their neighborhood had nearly lost its land rights because the HOA stopped paying rent. But the biggest lesson from the whole experience was simple. Just because someone builds houses on land doesn't mean they own it. Sometimes ownership is buried in old paperwork, hidden in decades-old contracts, and occasionally an entire neighborhood forgets who actually owns the ground beneath their homes. If you watched this story all the way to the end, leave a comment and tell me which city and country are you watching from. And if you enjoy HOA drama stories like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story.